Okie dokie. Hello, hello, hello. Start letting people in here from the peanut gallery. Admit all. Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. Welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. It's going to be a fun one today. Got an illustrious guest as usual, and we had a
And
little
you've
bit
also got
of.
someone from England
We've also got we got some bloke from England as well. Oh no, you're saying we have someone from England
as well,
as a
yes. No,
as
I
the
was referring to myself.
oh, to your stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like trying to, we'll talk about it later, but I'm trying to like establish how much you're from England versus Germany and how that all fits together. But maybe we'll talk about that later, actually. Um, but before we get into that, we just like to give people a chance to get settled and get into the room here. Say hi to the people out on social media. If you're out there on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, just say hello. We'll get the full story here. Give the intro to the show in a moment. And if for some reason you're interested, you're watching live, and you want to come check us out in the Zoom room, maybe you want to ask a question or just feel a little bit closer to our hearts, we'll put a link into the chat where you can click on it and you can join us here and register. And that'll also help you keep updated on each week's new session and continue to join us as we have these every Saturday. And I'll explain what we're doing here. This is Piano Tech Radio Hour. What we do here is we gather every Saturday to meet with and we learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable folks in the piano world. This includes manufacturers, rebuilders, musicians, makers of other instruments, of course, piano techs too. Our mutual goal is to become better at our craft, to help each other, and to create an ever more musical world together. Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, an online learning resource that gives you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. You can also subscribe to Piano Tech Radio Hour at just $16 a month, direct access to each week's private Zoom call, all the archival recordings of over 200 episodes, over 4 years worth of content in our member area. You can join PTRH at bit.ly/join PTRH, bit.ly/join PTRH. And then a little bit of housekeeping before I introduce today's guest. Make sure you check out the podcast, pianotechradio.com. We're on a little bit of a hiatus, going to start heavily releasing episodes in the near future, both from the past, about 2 years ago, as well as some of our more recent episodes, which is a recent edition where we try to release 2 episodes a week and keep current with our recent recordings. Also, check out our Substack blog, pianotechniciansmasterclass.substack.com. If you're interested in our higher level member content, like the voicing, the regulation, the stuff that's on like rebuilding or even piano design, really high quality stuff. Check out the blog first. You can review some of the content. We've got some pictures, some useful information. If you like it, you can click to sign up to actually join the full show. And make sure you check out our Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter as well. And also remember, we've got a masterclass coming up with Glenn Bingham on regulation. He worked for Steinway for many years, and he's bringing us the 220 method, which is basically like a way to really kind of make your regulation process efficient. So we can get to see an inside look at how that goes. And it's not for if you are sort of a beginner, fine, you could join us, you could learn some things. But I think it's really helpful for that kind of intermediate level where you know a little bit about regulation, but you really want to clean it and polish it up. So we'll be having that coming up, and Jess is going to put a link to register for that. All right. What we'll do right now is we will introduce our special guest, and his name is Frederick Kempf. And he is a seasoned pianist, celebrated for his captivating performances, deep musical insights. He's won the BBC Young Musician of the Year and enchanting audiences worldwide with his exceptional talent. Of course, the Young Musician of the Year was up at back. And then beyond his solo achievements, Frederick is a passionate advocate for chamber music, notably as part of the acclaimed Kempf Trio, founded in 2000. The trio comprises Frederick on piano, Pierre Bensaid on violin, and Alexander Chaushian on cello. Forgive any mispronunciations. Together, they have garnered international acclaim for their dynamic interpretations and seamless ensemble playing. Frederick's contributions to classical music extend beyond the concert stage. He's dedicated to mentoring aspiring musicians, sharing his expertise through masterclasses worldwide. Saw a couple of those, with lots of views on YouTube. Really specialized information, really high level stuff. These sessions are renowned for refining technique, exploring musical interpretation, delving into the nuanced artistry of chamber music performance. Freddy's collaborated with leading orchestras across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, recording spanning from solo piano work to collaborative chamber music, showcases versatility and musicality as a respected figure in the classical music scene. And that's all allowed. I'm sure Freddie's just ready to get started talking. He's like, okay, yes, I've done all these wonderful things. Let's have a conversation. But in addition, it's not even in the bio that we put together. He's also a wonderful conductor and starting to build. I would say starting. The way he described it to me in our pre-call, is that he's just sort of happened into this world of conducting and starting to build a career in there. But has also done quite a bit of it already. So, Freddie, welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour.
Thanks very much, Ethan. Hi.
So first, well, let's just solve that question that you had earlier on. So you live in Germany right now.
Yep.
You're visiting London. You're from England? What's your kind of background? Where are you really from? Where do you consider yourself from?
I was born in England,
Uh-huh.
in a suburb of London, and I grew up in England. So I went to school here. So I am basically English. I sound English. I think in English, but at the same time, my father was German and my mother's Japanese. So I don't actually have any English blood. And I guess when I met my wife, she happens to be German. I ended up moving to Germany, and now only after meeting her, I've gotten a German passport as in German nationality, and I live in Bavaria now. So Bavaria is I'd say it's a part of Germany with a very strong self-identity because, well, it's just has a lot of characteristics. So I feel Bavarian. I can speak German with a Bavarian accent. I don't try to speak Bavarian, but if I'm in Germany, people might assume I'm from Bavaria. And I can't imagine myself moving back here. As in England here right now.
Mhm.
But obviously, I grew up here, so I'm English, but I've become German, and I'm living in Germany now, and I probably won't ever leave anymore.
Fascinating. And so you're all speaking to your children in German mostly, or not? How do you
No,
approach that?
our house speaks English, as in if everyone is speaking to each other, we speak English.
Hmm.
But they speak to each other in their own mother tongue, so everyone will speak German to each other. But if they speak to me, they speak in English.
Hmm.
But that's just so that they have English as a as a mother language. Yeah.
Which is much easier in Europe generally. I feel like a lot of people in Europe tend to be able to develop English for whatever reason, versus, you get kids in the United States who take, 4 years of Spanish in high school and then they can't speak a word.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I think languages. That's a big hobby of mine, and I
Hmm.
think that the big deal with languages is you have to be able to use them. So, in Europe, you can just drive a couple of hours, and you're in France, or you're speaking another language. Like from us. I mean, Danish is a country quite close by. You can easily, from our house, you can get to speak Slovene in Slovenia, or Italian is very close. What else? Switzerland, you speak French. France is not too far away. Polish is not far away. Czech is not far away. So, you know, you get to experience those languages. And I've studied over 30 languages myself. And the general rule is listen, understand, and repeat. So you can only do that if you actually are able to hear that language. So in Europe, I think it's just much more easy. I think if you're living bordering Mexico, maybe you do have a chance that you can just drive over the border, or you're able to use that in some kind of neighborhood. But in Europe, I just think it's much easier to do so. So you can actually, it's like hearing a piece of music and being able to play back something on your instrument. It's the same thing, being able to say back a word in a different language. It's simply, listening and practicing and doing it.
Wonderful. Yeah, we'll talk. Maybe we'll touch upon this some more because you also have a breadth of interests and activities outside of music, which I think makes you quite a well-rounded individual and probably contributes to your ability to bring your best self to the music as well. But let's focus back on pianos for a moment, and also give a little bit of a preview for the true nerds here in the session that you've been playing for a long time. You really take music seriously, and you do a wonderful job with your interpretations and technique. Um, but in addition to that, some pianists do, some pianists don't. You really like take the instrument itself seriously, and like to collaborate with piano technicians and, have philosophies about the instrument and what's the best way it can perform optimally. So give us a primer on, how you think about the piano as a device, as a mechanical device.
Mhm. I mean, I can refer to a very recent experience. I was just in South Korea for good 2 weeks, and I played two major recitals. I mean, one in a kind of in a coastal resort town, and then in one of the main recital halls in Seoul. And I also played Beethoven and Prokofiev concerto in the main concert hall in Seoul. And they have four Hamburg Steinway concert grounds to choose from. Um, I mean, as I remember that I had to pick an instrument, and my first question is always to the in-house technician there. I want to know what they think of the piano, because for me, my instrument, it's not the keyboard that I'm going to be sitting in front of. It's the venue, it's the concert hall. It's the humidity of the concert hall. It's the instrument that's been living there. I mean, I think one of those Steinway D's have been there, 30 years, in fact, and I know that the person responsible, I only briefly met him. I think he's in his 90s, even in Seoul. And he's been educated in Hamburg, and he knows those instruments far better than I do. And then I'm supposed to just pick one in 1 hour and decide what's the best to use. So, I was trying to understand from him, what he felt was the most suitable, or in what condition those instruments were. But he was being very respectful and just said I should choose myself. So I had, up to 2 hours to choose those pianos, and I guess, I mean, from my point of view, I mean, I've been taught some of this. I've studied some of this myself. I know that the mechanism of a piano is a thrown pivot. So as a pianist, we can only affect the velocity that the hammer hits the string, nothing else. So that cuts out a lot of speculation. So it's simply about basically about decibel amounts and the actual the total of all the frequency values that you can get out of that piano, which is based on the condition of the soundboard, the how hard the hammers are, and the humidity of everything that's in that building. So I mean, I'm just listening to what I can hear, and I simply choose the instrument that gives me. I would say for me, the most important thing is the extremities of what I can produce, as in the highest culmination of frequencies and the highest amount of volume and the lowest. Because with music, as a performer, when you see forte and piano as in loud and soft, there is no set amount of decibel for that loudness or the softness, but you can affect the range in between those two things. If I mean, in a concert hall situation, you're in a concert hall. People will be quiet. They will be attentive. There's a set pattern of behavior. So you know within what range you can affect that. So for me, that choosing that range is the most important thing. So I mean, I had Beethoven and Prokofiev, so for me, the Beethoven was not so important. The Prokofiev, I did need just, I guess, in that situation, the largest range between quiet and loud, you know, and I needed high frequencies to be able to cut through the orchestra. And I mean, the four pianos I had, they were basically, I mean, I didn't have time to Google the serial numbers, but I could tell that they were roughly 6 years apart. So one was about 2 years old, you know, 2, 8, 14, 20 years old, roughly. And I can't tell you which one I picked now. Which one did I pick now? I think I picked the second oldest. The guy in the hall said he thought I would pick the third oldest, but I felt that the second one was, it needed more physical effort, but I felt I had that, and because I would be playing quite low intensity in the first time, I thought I would rather take that risk, and I think it paid off. I mean, I had various amounts of feedback from musicians who are recording themselves for Deutsche Grammophon, or simply reviewers who are educated, reviewers who are uneducated, and just the general public. And it seemed, I mean, I was quite happy with the choice I made. I mean, that's a kind of a summary of my most recent concert experience.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Yeah, that is a recurring theme that we find when we learn about, providing the best experience for concert situations. I mean, general situations, of course, as well, whether you're in a concert hall or not, but that is specifically returns as a theme. It's about dynamic range,
Yeah.
You can be quiet, but also color, range, you could be quiet, you could be loud, but also can you get some of the kind of like softness, right, as well as the brightness. If you can factor in those two things as well, that's wonderful. I'm trying to think if there, you mentioned like you could just throw the hammer at the string and you could really only affect the speed. And I feel like I had read somewhere Mario Egrek is sort of like a renowned piano technician who wrote a book called Pianos Inside Out. And I'm trying to recollect. I feel like I've read a portion of the book where he talks a little bit about, potentially being able to affect slightly more than that. Maybe depending on, I don't remember the specifics of it, but it could be, well, first of all, if you are repeating notes, then you do definitely have some nuance there, whether it's moving fast, but how much of a windup did it have? Because that can affect, you can still have the same speed, but it may be traveling faster or slower. And also, if you really, I believe there's like, if you really whip that hammer out towards the string, right, with like a very hard blow, I believe there's this kind of like slight bending in the hammer, right, that affects how the hammer hits the string at that point, which can add some slight effects. So that, there's probably a little bit of nuance available there, but you're right. That is kind of the
Well,
primary.
I mean,
Yeah.
for me, that's speaking about only being able to affect the velocity. That doesn't limit the amount of control that we have as a pianist. And I think that our biggest factor that we have is the way that we can combine, how we can combine frequencies. And I mean, I've only done basic physics, but I know now very clearly how, like the octave, each octave higher, the wavelength is exactly half the amount of the octave below, and a fifth is two-thirds of that wavelength, whereas a quarter is a fourth is, I think, a third of the wavelength. And so if you then overlay those wavelengths against each other, you actually get corresponding longer waves, where if you play a fifth, of course you get both notes that you've played, but you also get the octave below, because the intersections of those wavelengths is the same correspondence of double the wavelength of the lower note, and those kind of things. And I mean, I teach this to my pupils, but you can simply do that by using the middle pedal to to lift the dampers of the harmonic series of each of those notes. And then when you play 2 or 3 notes that you're playing, then you will get that harmonic series, resonating within the piano. And depending on how you voice those 2 notes, if you play more strength on the higher note or the lower note, then you will get a different resonance of that harmonic series. And you can experiment with, I've done that as well, saying let's get the same amount of decibels coming out, but with a different shape of that harmonic series. And I think that, that we have huge control over. So basically, the more you have in the musical writing, where you have occurrences of octave writing or unison writing or with fifths, with these kind of very, how do you say, very exact occurrences of these frequency lengths, then as a performer, we do have a huge amount of control over the type of sound that will come out of the piano. But I think that's what I feel. Because I've taught in many places in the world. This doesn't really get taught. At least, the teachers, they're not focusing on that aspect of learning. And for me, also, what's important is where to position the piano. As in, people they don't look at the shape of the ceiling. They don't think where is the lid, and that also affects the basically the top end of the frequencies, and also how the audience hears. And I think one big failure of us performers is that we are only listening to the sound of the piano from 30 centimeters in front of the keyboard, and nobody hears the piano from that point. That for me, that was a very important lesson when I realized that the only person that hears it from that perspective is myself, and everyone else hears it from way over there, or in terms of recording 2 meters, sort of 45 degrees up. That's quite important, I think, for a performer to actually understand.
Yeah, and I feel like, once you learn that, then you learn more about it each time you do a performance. But before you know it, you're not really learning about it. Maybe there's a little bit of intuitive learning, but it's just sort of like you don't know what you don't know. Then once you know, I'm sure you can start to take it into account more and experiment and sort of change your approach. I think.
The important thing is that the performer learns to actually listen to the result. I found that's been our biggest mistake, is that we are only, and I think that's mostly for pianists, because I studied violin. I started playing the violin also aged 4, and I took it through college as well. I did the first two years of exams, and I've realized that on violin, that the huge difference on a different instrument is that on violin, that you actually have to take care of that sound the whole time the sound is there, and you have to take care of the end of that sound. And on piano, you cannot affect that. You can only affect the beginning of the note. Yeah, of course you can affect the cutoff, but as a result, we all tend to only be concerned about the start of the note. How do we hit that key correctly? How loudly or how hard do we play that key? And that's it. And then we forget about it. So that, I think that's also a big difference for us.
I would love to get some of your playing. We do have some short little recorded samples here. You and I met previously and just captured a few things so we can get a touch of your artistry. So let's go to the first one here momentarily. And this is the Kapustin. We just have about a minute, a little bit longer than a minute. Could you just give us a little a little explanation of what we're gonna check out?
Yeah, Kapustin, he was this is probably a little bit more political than it should sound, just because of the current situation. But Kapustin was born in Ukraine, but at the time Ukraine was part of Russia. So Kapustin he was a very accomplished jazz pianist, and ended up performing in the most famous jazz orchestra or jazz band in Moscow. And they did a lot of film music for the equivalent of Hollywood in Russia. And at some point, Kapustin started making arrangements himself for the big band to play. I mean, he's a very technical jazz player, so it's not as, I guess it's not, it's it's much more worked out than say some of the great jazz improvisers that we know. But for us as a classical player, it's wonderful because then you can actually sound like a jazz improviser. I mean, you're playing very worked out music. Um, I, this particular prelude, this is from 24 Preludes, I think Opus 53. I actually was looking for something easier for one of my students to play because his music is very complicated, so it takes forever to learn. But as she was learning, I kind of thought, well, it's so beautiful that I wanted to learn it myself. So it's basically it's a two-part. It's a theme, and then it gets repeated in a much larger version. I've only played the original theme in its kind of very intimate statement, but I think it's very beautiful, moving music.
Okay, great. That's wonderful. Thank you for the intro. Let's take a listen. That's cool stuff. Yeah, I
Mhm.
wasn't really familiar with Kapustin before this. I mean, regrettably, I'll admit to that. But and you're giving me the background that I didn't really have. I was wondering, was he a jazz player or not? Because we've had some guests on recently doing some, what they would call classical composition, and actually saying, they're not influenced by jazz, but you hear it and you're like, oh, I'm hearing jazz voicings and jazz, rhythms and you know, uh, different types of chords and melodies that you might find in jazz. And it's interesting to just think about that. I like if I've studied all sorts of things. I don't have an infinite time, but it'd be very interesting to sort of compare and contrast the growth of classical and jazz music, and see both the interfaces, but also the coevolution, right, of things happening sort of concurrently, maybe influencing each other, but also happening kind of independently. Like how you have a scientific discovery in different parts of the world at the same time. They might not even know that they're both discovering it, right?
Sure, yeah. I mean, Kapustin's music, the music that he's written is certainly classical, simply because it's very difficult to improvise on his music. I mean, I have I've tried to learn to improvise jazz. I mean, I can play jazz. I just don't do it because I'm not very good at it. I if I was in a jazz club, and I was playing like I don't know, a 50-minute session, people would, they'd get up and start talking, they'd start ordering food. I can do it, but I'm background music. I'm not the kind that draws you in. Um, and Kapustin music is it's all written out. If I'm being very critical, I would say that, not all of his music is, that electrifying. He's written, I think, 15 piano concerti. And so far, I mean, I've not listened to everything, but I think, I'd say the second is absolutely wonderful. And up till now, I've not really been drawn to any of the others. And it sounds amazing, but at the same time, it doesn't pull you along, all the time. But he was a
I hear
great
that.
player. I mean, that's what he was. He was a great player. And if you search on YouTube, I mean, maybe not YouTube, I mean, because he wrote a lot of music to the Russian films. you can certainly find things where he's actually playing in it. And it's I'd say it's a bit like sort of Gershwin Bernstein, but at the same time it's very sort of 70s music. It's much punchier.
Mm.
Um, it's just more high paced and more sort of more in your face than it's not very laid back at all. So I mean I really love his music. So I'm sure that he will be very famous. He's already extremely famous among the students. If you go to any of the conservatoires or colleges, I mean, all the young people, they want to play Kapustin, because it's difficult. It's written for pianists. He was a pianist, so it's very appealing music for us to play.
Well, thank you for bringing that to the table. I appreciate it. Yeah, I did look him up on YouTube a little bit, and um, yeah, I mean, I can hear the cross pollination, with be it Herbie Hancock or Chick Corea or Keith Jarrett, maybe even Bill Evans. It'd be interesting to see how much of that is intentional or back and forth, unidirectional, bidirectional. But yeah, I appreciate you bringing that to the table. I want to talk a little bit about. We didn't get a bunch about your background, but you've been a musician for a very long time, or you started very early on. We usually like to get some foundation of that, just so we have some context for the conversation. What's been your journey as a musician? How and when did you know, hey, this is actually my career versus, I'm just, taking some lessons and getting good. What's been your journey?
Okay, I mean, first exposure to an instrument, it was simply around Christmas time. And, my parents took me to a toy store and they kind of said, is there anything you want for Christmas? Um, and I was 4. And I mean, I do remember I was simply looking at the price tags and I kind of said, will you get me that? And they said, yes. And then looked at something more expensive. I said, will you get me that? And they said, yeah. And then finally there was a point where they said, no, that's our limit. That's what you're going to get, and you're not going to get anything else. I had no idea what it was. And then on Christmas Day, I opened it, and it was a small electric keyboard. So that's all I got. So I had to play with it, and it came with some sheet music and like Jingle Bells or whatever it was. And I learned everything. So by New Year's, I sort of said, oh, I can play this thing now. I want something else. And I remember my mother then she could remember some piece of Chopin that I mean she's Japanese, so a lot of I'd say I'd say 9 out of 10 Japanese girls are forced to play the piano. I'd say. I mean, there's even like a word in Japanese meaning like feminine qualities, and they list like playing the piano or being able to sew or embroider something. It's like this kind of it's a thing that in the old days you were meant to be able to do. So she could play some Chopin waltz, but for me, the main thing was that she used both hands. And I'd only been in the instruction book, and only taught you to play with one hand and push buttons for chords in the other hand. So at that point, I said, "Oh, I want to learn how to play piano properly. Then, if that's how it's done." And at first, they kind of said, that's they just said, they just said no. I guess assuming that I'd lose interest. And then I think 2 or 3 months later, they finally gave in, and they took me to whatever local music school they found, in the telephone directory. And I started learning there. I know just thinking back on things, I know that my parents said that the teachers were quite surprised that I taught myself to read music, aged 4, because my parents couldn't read music, so I'd somehow figured that out myself. I had perfect pitch, but I mean, lots of people. I think more people have perfect pitch than people realize. I don't think that's such a big deal. And so then I just started, taking lessons. In England, we have quite a practical. I mean, it's called grades in England, but it's just like a series of exams or standardized, levels of ability. Meaning, so it's from 1 to 8, and 8 is basically the lowest level that you could actually get into music college.
Is that
So it
the
was a
the
very
Royal School? Is that what they call that? or is that different?
Yeah, I think it's associated board or something. I don't know what it's called anymore now, but
Okay.
it makes it very easy for kids and parents and teachers. So I started doing that, and then also in England, I think it's quite unique to England. They have these local competitions where, I could win like sort of $500 worth of books or whatever, electrical equipment from a local store. So that it was a hobby, because I was good at it. It was the only thing I was good at. I wasn't good at anything else. So I just did it. And then by the age of 8, I guess the organizer of the local festival of the competition, he would bring, I mean, this is the equivalent of, say, the Chicago Symphony or the New York Philharmonic to that town once a year at Christmas time, and he kind of said, "Oh, you've won everything in our local competition. Why don't I try to get you to play a concerto with the orchestra that I bring?" And it was just a luck, that I ended up then playing Mozart with them at the age of 8. And then after that, in England, I guess I was sort of had the chance to play. I first did that Mozart, then I did another Mozart, more difficult one, another difficult one, then Beethoven age 10, and Mendelssohn first, and then Liszt first, age 11. I don't remember. I mean, I did Rachmaninoff Paganini Rhapsody age 12. It was amazing to have this chance to play with a professional orchestra, just, less than an hour away from home. Um, and doing competitions, and I guess at some point, well, I guess it was, I was in high school, and I found school very easy, put it that way. So I already started school 1 year earlier. I sort of switched to secondary school also 1 year earlier, and then I then won this competition, and basically I had quite a lot of concert work. I mean, as a 13-year-old, I probably had 2 or 3 concerts a month, professional paid concerts. So I just couldn't go to school. So the school would let me off, saying, "Yeah, of course, if he's got rehearsal, he's got concerts, then that's fine. He just doesn't show up as long as he does the homework." And I was caught up on homework at school. And then I think age 14, the school kind of said, "Well, why don't you just try to finish the school exam, the high school exam?" And in England, I think the system, it makes it quite easy for you to do that. I mean, like in Germany now, where I live, I realize that would be very difficult for anyone aged even 16 or 17 to finish everything in one go. But in England, it's so much based on that simple last exam. So I simply did it I majored in music and French because I mean I could speak French. And that sort of meant I could finish school age 14, and that's I started music college, and it was a hobby that kind of grew into a profession. I was working. I mean, it didn't feel like working because as a musician you only want to play concerts. So and then I had enough income from that to continue living. So that's what I did. That's and now I'm here. I'm old now.
I love that story. I do. Um, my background in terms of like learning about things and getting interested in things, I resonate with your journey of I'm almost more interested in it than my parents. Nobody's really like, oh, you gotta. I remember like just yeah, I wanted to do soccer. My mom was like,
Really?
let's
Okay.
see, you got to run. I'll ride that bike down a couple of blocks if you can run alongside me and you keep we'll do soccer. Like it was kind of like and with the music, she would give me it got me the lessons, but there was no like you have to practice and like sitting with me, studying alongside. So I always find it like having a child now, I find it fascinating, you know, it's great to put energy into your kids and have them do all these things because they're going to develop the skills. It's useful for their brains, their development. Um, but ultimately, each of us develops our own interests and skills,
Yeah.
regardless of the external like pressures and all that stuff. So I like that story, and I love how how your passion just emerged, and you found the support that that you needed. It would have been, you know, there could have been, I guess, an alternate universe where you didn't get as much support. You know, oh, you know what? No, Freddie, that's too expensive. We didn't get you for a Christmas either. You know, so that's great.
Yeah.
Um, I'd love to talk about conducting because, you know, as we mentioned earlier, you've gotten into conducting. You know, you also do some teaching on the side, but you had mentioned to me previously that that's something that has kind of picked up and sort of been something that's taken, you know, the way we had talked about it previously, it's taken over some time that you might have used
Mhm.
for other things, and now you're doing some conducting. So how has that developed?
Yeah, I mean that was also I mean it started in 2012. I mean I know the conductor. I think he's relatively well known in the US. Andrew Litton. I think he's chief of New York Ballet right now. Maybe he's not anymore. But I always remember him telling me how that when he was a young kid, he always dreamt of standing in front of an orchestra and conducting it, you know. And that struck with me because I never had that dream. I never wanted to do that, you know. But as a pianist, as a performer, you know, you work very closely with conductors, and so it's always been at the back of my mind, thinking, so what exactly is the conductor doing? Because I'm playing the piano here, they're there as well, and I mean, it's not just the musical role, but you also kind of, I mean, if I'm being just honest and candid, we're also thinking, are they getting paid more than us or not? It's just out of interest because you see them all the time, um, and it was in, I think it was 2011, 2012. So in London, we just signed the contract that I would do all the Beethoven piano concerti with one of the main orchestras in London. And at the time, the chief conductor was Charles Dutoit of the orchestra. And then a few months later, there was I don't even remember why, but there was some big financial crisis in London. And basically, there was all this kind of, people saying, oh, there's not so much money around. And the orchestra was saying they were having trouble financing that series. And they kind of said, look, we can't afford to put you on doing all the Beethoven with Charles Dutoit, but if we if we replace you for a younger, cheaper soloist, then that would feel very unfair for us. I mean, for you, because I mean, I've worked with them, since I was 8 years old, and they also said, but at the same time, if we booked someone that wasn't our chief conductor to do that series of concerts, that would also look completely wrong in our season. We can't do that at this stage. And I remember at the time, my manager, I mean, I've known her since I was 17. She's called Mary. She doesn't manage me personally anymore, but she came up with a solution saying, Freddie should just, do those concerti conducting himself. That way then it doesn't look wrong on the season because he's worked with you every year. And she said to me, why don't you do that? I said, Mary, I have no idea how to conduct. I never wanted to conduct. I don't think that's the way. She said, we'll save the series. At least you get to do this. Just say yes, and we can talk about it next year, close to the time, or you can still change your mind. I said, do you think we can still get conductor in if it doesn't feel right? She said, yeah, sure, we can do that. And, so I kind of just said yes and forgot about it. And then I remember, 6 months before the first concert, I was kind of thinking, I actually have this as in my diary. I actually have to know how to do this. I had no idea what it means. What does it mean to conduct an orchestra or to play an concerto without conductor? And luckily, one of my best friends, he's still, he's conducting a lot of work, and he is a good teacher. So I remember asking him. I said, Matt, can you help me just get ready for these concerts? I really don't know what I have to do. And I remember him. I mean, this is 6 months before. This was in spring before the September concerts, and I remember him starting to address the idea of how to conduct or how to rehearse, basically. Um, and the kind of input he was telling me, what he was teaching me as such, had nothing to do with what I thought you would learn as a conductor. I as a performer, having worked with many conductors, I thought that he would show me how to move my hands, or he would show me how to set the speed or how to show a certain sound. But I mean, he was only talking to me saying, okay, how are you going to plan your rehearsal? I said, well, you can plan my rehearsal. He said, you've got these 3 concerti to play. Which one are you going to start with? And I said, well, I think I start with number 1. He said, okay, if you start with number 1, then that's the smallest orchestration. How do you know when you want to call the trumpets then and the trombones? And I said, I don't know. He said, it would make more sense to start with the largest orchestra. So my point is that all the questions he was addressing had nothing to do with music. It was simply to do with organization, working out when to call people. I mean, I had basically a professional symphony orchestra for 6 hours for 2 days, and I had to learn how to plan that time. Nothing to do with the music. They can all play. They know how to play the music. They know the notes. And he was trying to teach me to see it from completely the other end. And that's the job of a conductor. So, I mean, for me, it was very interesting. I wanted to learn that at the time. This is 12 years ago. It was something I'd always been curious about. It wasn't something I always wanted to do, but when after you hit 30, you start to want to know. You want to learn other things in life, and so this was just the right time for me, and I was incredibly lucky to have a good teacher, to actually have a world level orchestra to learn with, and I mean, in that time, I'd say I did that. This is leading up to COVID. I did a fair amount of I did maybe, I don't know, 10 to 20 absolutely world level orchestras, different programs, Beethoven symphonies, Dvorak symphonies, all Mozart symphonies, all kinds of repertoire.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, basically that taught me that I actually love playing the piano. I like being able to just sit at the piano and play. And if I want to make a sound, I just play the sound on the piano. I don't have to sort of talk to people and explain what's going on, and then try to gesture and then hope that they play the way that I want them to play. I'm incredibly grateful for being able to learn that. But I mean, I only mention that to you because in South Korea, just now a couple of weeks ago, I did this program with the Beethoven Third Piano Concerto and Prokofiev Second, and it was a good orchestra. But the conductor, he had admitted to me, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying this. He said, I'm not so experienced with the second Prokofiev concerto, and the orchestra didn't know it very well. And for me as a performer, I really want everyone on that stage to play as well as they can. I just want us to sound good. It's not about me. It's just I just want the overall effect. So the most efficient way was for me to kind of give him very direct kind of conducting input, saying, if I was conductor, this is what I would do.
Mm-hmm.
I want this kind of sound from the brass. I think we have to address this kind of balance issue. And I've been taught how to do this, so he very quickly realized that I know what I'm not speaking as a pianist to him. And I never overstepped his authority. I always said this very privately to him, saying, if you agree, pass this on to the orchestra, because I don't want to take away his own authority from the orchestra, because I've been taught that as well.
Yeah.
But I guess the orchestra did see this, because there was one phrase I had to rehearse myself, because the conductor said, I don't really understand what you want. He said, just save time, just tell them directly. So I did try to rehearse those, whatever it was, 16 bars myself. And the result was that the orchestra then, they want me to come back next season to open the season doing a large Tchaikovsky piece in both Chopin piano concerti, directing from the keyboard. Again, it's not something I asked to do, but I know I can do it. I'm still thinking, is that really something I want to do? Because I just want to play, but at the same time,
You've got an affinity for it, yeah.
well, I mean, it's just making music. I want, it's back in Korea. I love Korea. My Korean is now finally, I'm sort of getting on that verge of being fluent. I'm sort of watching, just flying here from Germany. I was sort of watching some Korean series, switching the subtitles off, and I could actually understand it properly. So I want, I'm very happy to go back to Korea,
I hope that
So
turns out well. I want to play a couple because we have a couple more musical samples. We only have about 10 minutes left, but I think we could fit them. We'll squeeze them both in and have some commentary on your story there. It's interesting to me just the story of getting into conducting. But let's play the Rachmaninoff. Give us a little primer on that before we pull that one up.
yeah, sure. So this is from his Moment Musical or musical moments, and I only came across these during the Rachmaninoff kind of I don't know, jubilee. There was, I think, some kind of anniversary of his birth or his death, and because these works are not played much outside Russia, and only Schubert and only Rachmaninoff wrote a set of music called musical moments, and I mean, that's quite fascinating because the Schubert ones are very famous, and it's they're not a sonata, then they're not a specific form of music. It's simply a moment of music. So for me that was very interesting how a composer would use that. This is Rachmaninoff's version. There are also 6 pieces, and I guess for me, I've realized this somehow during COVID and during you know um, after the sort of invasion that Russia started, that I feel this huge sadness when I play Rachmaninoff. I don't even know why, what it is, but I feel a lot of sadness, and I feel Rachmaninoff must have also felt this sadness. He also left Russia for whatever reason he did to come to the US. And so this is the third of his musical moments, and I'm just playing.
Let's get that one. I'm actually impressed. I feel there's a little bit of a jazziness in that one as well that I didn't notice the first time I checked it out. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the third clip that we have here, and you can get into explain the third one as well afterwards. Unless you want to, do you want to explain the Schubert as well before we play that one?
Yeah, I mean the Schubert is simply another musical moment. It's also the third one, and it's very different. But I remember, um, I guess this is one of the pieces that I just remember sort of from childhood where I just liked it. I mean, I guess when you're young, you don't know why you like certain pieces of music. And I remember I must have heard this either on the radio or somewhere, and I always wanted to play it. And it's kind of one of those pieces where when you do try to play it when you're younger, it doesn't really work. It's actually more difficult than it sounds. But it's been nice to, I mean, this is the first season I'm actually playing these pieces. So it's just been nice to actually finally play this work kind of almost 40 years later.
Great. Yeah, you do a great job of executing it as well. It's the melody is relatively, at least for me, you know, memorable. I've definitely heard it many times before. That's great. Thank you for bringing that little theme in there of the musical moments. I didn't know that was a musical moment. I just was familiar with the melody. Yeah.
It's been quite fascinating for me just because, actually actually learning them. I mean, they're both 28 minutes, which is quite long work for classical music. I mean, if you think your average Beethoven sonata is about 25 minutes, so 28 minutes is quite a long space of time. But I guess the main thing is that it's free music. Classical music tends to be very technical. Like it's a sonata specific form, and these are the only two sets in the entire history of music where a composer said, "This is just a moment of music. It's not a rondo. It's not a sonata. It's not variations. It's simply a musical moment." So for me, it's been interesting to understand how those two composers have used that.
Hopefully everybody could hear that. You could hear it, right, when I was playing it through? Those
I could
samples?
hear. I didn't. I'm not sure I heard the Rachmaninoff, if I'm honest. Like I
Really?
wasn't.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
because I did get a comment. Oh, did you hear the last one?
I did.
Did
I
you?
heard the last one. Yeah, I did. Yeah,
You did hear the last one.
yeah, but
Can
not
people
the.
tell me if for some reason they weren't going through? Let's see. Justice, you're telling Justice is our assistant. She's telling us that she couldn't hear. So, but are there other audience members? Because we could play them again. No, you could hear it.
I
Frankie, I
heard,
see you shaking your head. Is that saying you could hear it or you couldn't, Frankie?
I could not hear it.
Come on, guys, just tell them to speak up. All three or just one?
I couldn't hear just one.
Just one, Frankie. How about you? Which one couldn't you hear? All three.
Rachmaninoff.
The Rachmaninoff. Okay, so it's just the Rachmaninoff. Let's play that. It's totally worth totally worth actually hearing it. All right, just a second. Thank you guys. Sorry about that. I'm not sure why that is because I shared it in the same way. So just I'll play it and then feel anybody just shout if for some reason you can't hear it. All right, let's see here. Maybe I have to let me close these other files that I have open. That might help. All right, here comes the Rachmaninoff again. Yeah, it's good. All right, let's pop that over here. I'm gonna hit play. So I'm playing now. Tell me if you can't hear. Just say something.
Oops.
All right, we did it. Awesome. Thank you for taking the time to get those pull those together, Frederick. I think we did a good job and it came through
I,
rather well.
I have to say, as a performer, for me, it's quite notable how there's a massive difference in the amount of sound that comes out of the piano between those two sets of musical moments. Because the Schubert is very, very small. The way it's
Hmm.
written, the hands are very close together, and the Rachmaninoff uses so much range on the piano. Like you really, as a player, you really feel huge amount of difference in sound. Like,
Hmm. Yeah, it's I would almost describe it as like a meaty, the Rachmaninoff is like meaty versus the Schubert is jaunty and light and it's almost like a dance. It's not a dance per se, but it has that kind of a feeling of having a dancing quality. All right, well, we're supposed to end here at the hour, so we could talk for much longer. I really appreciate your level of expertise here and be willing to share it with us and, play a little bit as well. You took the extra time to play to make some recordings for us that are custom for this program. So I really appreciate that. Amidst all your travels, we just met with you the other day in Germany. All of a sudden you're over there in London. So thanks for fitting this in. Anything else you'd like to just highlight before we roll out? Where people should find out more things, or find a concert or some recording or something? Where would you send people?
No, I mean, it's been great being a guest with you, Ethan, and just nice to be part of this community. So.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, we can look you up online, KEMPF, which is also kind of fun for piano, that you have the P and the F right there, kind of like the pianoforte. Did you ever notice that?
No, I can't say. Well, now I probably will, but no.
Yeah, I like it because if you had a logo, somebody might try messing around with, like, make the P and the F the loud and the soft, symbols. All right, let's do our closing. We've reached the end of another musical journey here at Piano Tech Radio Hour. Thanks to Freddy Kempf for joining us today, as always. We're brought to you by Piano Tech. Masterclasses, cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. For those of you that joined us today by signing up for this session individually, make your life more convenient. Subscribe to Piano Tech Radio Hour, just $16 a month. You get the recording of today's session in our member area, automatic registration for each week's new session. Sign up at bit.ly/join PTRH. It's bit.ly/join PTRH. Don't forget the podcast, pianotechradio.com, the blog on Substack, our social handles on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and our upcoming masterclass with Glenn Bingham. I think it's in less than a week. Yeah, I think we're just this coming Thursday. If you want to learn some more about grand regulation from one of the greatest guys in the industry, check in with us on Thursday on that. I think we still have early bird pricing right now too. So if you're interested, make sure you act now. Act now. Okay. All right, Freddie, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks everyone who came to join us in the audience. Appreciate you.